Hello, everybody, and welcome back. Once again, we're greeted with Dr. Hardt. Dr. Hardt, thank you so much for being here.
Doug's always a joy to talk with you.
It's definitely my joy. Well, Dr. Hardt, we've done several videos recently on Delta Brainwaves, and it's created quite a stir in the alumni community, as well as even TikTok and YouTube. And one of the things that keeps getting asked over and over again is, what are some of the things that people are reporting that Delta waves are used for?
Very interesting. Perhaps we should begin by noting that I made the first scientific report of the brainwaves of Kundalini. 1988, I had a very remarkable man who in some ways was utterly unremarkable, a bird-like, self-effacing kind of man, but with enormous powers. He came for training, and on his third day, he showed massive synchronized delta waves on 6 channels, left and right frontal, left and right temporal, left and right central, whereas they did not affect the occipitals, which continued to show his normal, shall we say, very modest or even tiny alpha brainwaves. And so I was alerted, we found out by, when I showed him these brainwaves, and I said, well, what is this? I'd never seen this before. And he goes, I don't know. So he was training in a chamber where I had 16 speakers, 4 on the front, 4 on the back, 4 on each of the side walls. And he was doing Alpha 1, so he was just getting feedback from 4 speakers. So I said to Maureen, my assistant, let's connect his 6 channels of Delta at the same amplitude as his Alpha to these, additional speakers. And that way, if he ever does this again, the Delta, which is way bigger than his Alpha, is going to boom out of those speakers. Of course, I'll alert him ahead of time what I'm doing. So at the end of the day, if he ever does that again, I'll be able to say, okay, well, what was that? And he won't be able to say, no. And so we did that. This huge chamber is just rocking with these massive delta waves booming through the speakers. And at the end, I go in and I'm all excited. I go, well, what was that? And he goes, well, what was what? I said, well, when all those speakers were going off and booming, he goes, oh, well, that was when the Kundalini was coming up. And I go, Kundalini? You have Kundalini? Why didn't you tell me? And he goes, oh, well, I didn't think you'd know what it was. And I didn't think it was that important, and just sort of faded away. And so I was now alerted. I subsequently, that was 1988. In 1990, I talked about this at the Spiritual Emergence Conference in Asilomar, California, 1990. And then in 1996, at Rob Call Future Health Winter Brain Conference, I presented the full brainwaves and showed what was going on, this massive delta activity. And afterwards, so this was the first presentation to the scientific world of the brain, conscious delta, waking delta, the brainwaves of Kundalini. And after the talk, Gary Schwartz, a prominent psychologist of Yale, Harvard fame, and I think now he's at University of Arizona, studying near-death experiences or something like that. He came up to me and whispered in my ear, he said, Jim, when I was at Harvard, a student came in and he insisted that I had to measure his brainwaves. And I somehow felt compelled to do that. And Gary knew enough about EEGs. He went down to the neurology department, put some electrodes on the guy, and measured his brainwaves. And Gary said that he had seen brainwaves very similar to what I had just shown in the world's first presentation of the brainwaves of Kundalini. Now, Gary knew enough about EEG to be freaked out by somebody making big conscious delta when they weren't in a coma or in stage 3 or stage 4 sleep. And so he went to one of his buddies in the neurology department, showed him the polygraph, and the neurologist freaked right out and said, don't ever let him do that on university property again. And Gary is like, oh, wow, this is wonderful. And then the neurologist said, well, may I keep the polygraph because I want to show it to some colleagues? And then Gary said he promptly lost the polygraph record. How do you lose a big hunk of paper this thick and, that big? But Gary said that's what science typically does with anomalous data. So there was data there, it was available, but it was not available. And so science suppresses anomalous data routinely. Look at when Einstein introduced the theory of relativity. He was ridiculed. And only when experimental evidence started to come in did people initially reluctantly, and grudgingly sort of come on board. And so one classic experiment was there was an eclipse happening, and they knew there was a star, eclipse of the sun. They knew there was a star behind the sun where it shouldn't have been able to be seen. But during the eclipse, they could see the star, which meant that the gravitational field of the sun had bent the light as it went by the sun. So light that, would be blocked by the sun actually was bent by the sun's immense gravitational field, and they could see it. So as studies like that began to come in, and people then began to accept relativity. And so the idea that there are waking, even very recently, when I've had Delta, I'll tell you a Delta story. I had in training a father and his 9-year-old boy. The father was a gifted database programmer. He was so gifted that IBM was in the process of buying his company for the express purpose of acquiring his contract. And so in the course of this training, he had a buzz happen. There was energy came up his spine and he was buzzing. He loved it. And so a family member, his father-in-law, had arranged for the QEEG people to measure the brainwaves of the boy and the father before their alpha training and then the day after. And then they put the data on a CD and sent it off to Texas for analysis. Well, a couple of days later, I get a frantic call from a doctor, medical doctor, at the QEEG center in Texas. And he said, you immediately have to contact your client because he has an aggressive, rapidly growing brain tumor. And I go, well, why do you say that? He said, well, he had a little bit of delta in his right frontal on day 1. And by day 7, it had grown enormously. And we know the only thing that can cause this is an aggressive, rapidly growing brain tumor. So I go, okay, I said goodbye. And picked up the phone to call the trainee and told him what had happened. I mean, he had just finished his alpha. So it's like, no big deal. He went and had a CAT scan the next day and there was nothing there. And so medical science, neurology in particular, has a penchant for freaking out when they see things like huge waking delta waves. And so it could be that this guy's giftedness in his database programming was somehow related to his anomalous delta waves. I can tell you another story. I had a guy come from Australia. Well, I should mention, first of all, that whenever I would see delta waves in somebody's record of this particular type, looking like Kundalini, I would ask them, are you aware of being able to influence other people? Because delta allows you to interfere constructively or destructively with the quantum mechanical probability energy density function of local universe, which means you can do magic or miracles or you can change reality. And so we had this guy come from Australia. He ran a tree trimming business. And I saw this in his record. And so in the end of the first day, I'm asking him, I'm looking through the polygraph record, and I say, are you aware of being able to influence other people? He goes, oi, mate. And I go, okay, well, tell me the details. And so in his tree trimming business, he would hire swarthy, uneducated blokes to rip down trees and grind them up in the grinder. And he had 2 problems, he said, with these swarthy, uneducated blokes. One is that they would cuss and swear at the customers. Not good. And 2, at the end of the day, they would refuse to steam clean the tree grinding equipment so that the sap from the tree limbs would harden overnight like glue and the machinery wouldn't work. It'd have to be painstakingly disassembled and then steam cleaned. And the reason these swarthy blokes wouldn't steam clean the equipment is because it was considered, any cleaning in their culture was considered women's work, and they didn't want to be thought to be a fag by cleaning anything, especially steam cleaning. So they would refuse to do it. And I go, okay, well, you got problems with these workers. What do you do? And he goes, oh, well, I go into a state and I install my intention into them, and they kind of like jump, and then they follow my instructions. And I go, for how long? And he goes, oh, interesting, you should ask. Well, sometimes it lasts a couple of weeks. Sometimes they snap out of it in a few days. And he goes, and I can't figure it out. Whenever they snap out of it, they immediately leave my employ. And I go, wait a minute. What do you mean you can't figure this out? You're using a Jedi mind trick to get these macho guys to do something that they think makes them a fag, which is cleaning the equipment. And they know you've been nagging them about it, and suddenly they find themselves doing it because of your Jedi mind trick. And when they snap out of it, they don't know what happened, but they know it has to be somehow related to you, and they want to get the heaven away from you as fast as they can. And I say, you have a lot of forgiveness to do, because to override the will of another human being is a clear definition of evil. And so you can use these powers to influence objects, but not people. And so you have some forgiveness to do. You have to forgive yourself for the evil of overriding the will of other people. And so he did. He did. Now, you might remember in Star Wars, the first one, Luke and Obi-Wan and the two droids are on Luke's speeder, and they're trying to enter it's Dantooine to book passage off planet. They're wanting to get to Alderaan. And some Imperial stormtroopers stop them. And Obi-Wan goes, these aren't the droids we're looking for. And the guy goes, these aren't the droids we're looking for. Move on, move on. Move along, move along. And so there, Obi-Wan has overridden the will of this Imperial stormtrooper to a good end, but is there an evil underlying this? Well, let me tell a Delta story to illustrate this. This happened in Canada. I was training a woman who had been deeply traumatized as a child. She was gang raped in the woods by a group of 6 men who were all boarding at her house. 2 of them were living there, sleeping there, and taking meals. They were transient workers involved with dredging the harbor on the Channel Island, the Canadian Channel Island in which she lived. And on one Sunday, they followed her out into the woods, and it was very nasty. So she was traumatized. And somehow this led to her having delta waves. So now she has a job. Her job is fundraising for nonprofits. And so she would make an appointment with a company president. She would go in and give her pitch, and the company president would always write a check so large in some cases that it would endanger the financial survivability of the company. And of course, she and the nonprofits were whistling Dixie. They were happy. But she was using this Delta power to cause these unhealthy for the company, too large donations to charities. And so then I left Canada. I went to Germany and to lead training at my center there. And she followed. She wanted to do another training right away. And from there, she worked on some anger. She had a lot of anger, as you might imagine. And from there, she went to India, to the Golden University. Well, to the credit of the high beings at the Golden University in India, they recognized, 1, that she had delta waves. They recognized, 2, that she was abusing these delta waves to financially dismember companies in the interest of donations to worthy causes. And so what they did, and it's a further example of the power of consciousness, they took away her ability to do this. I haven't seen her brainwaves subsequently, so I don't know how they did it or what they did, But this is an example of somebody who has been traumatized, has waking Delta, uses it for an ostensibly noble purpose, but with the bad side effect of, one, overriding the will of the company president, and two, endangering the survivability of the company by having that donation be beyond the ability of the company to support. Okay, so you can use your powers supposedly for good, but if you're overriding the will of another human being in order to do this, not a good thing. And so there are, I'll tell you some other Delta stories. I had a woman in training here in Sedona who had a lot of naturally occurring Delta. It was an Alpha training. She was doing Alpha 1, but I learned immediately upon seeing her brainwave, she had a lot of Delta. And so I said, okay, I want to hear some stories of how you've used this ability. She didn't know she had Delta, but she knew she had abilities. One time she was on a plane going somewhere, and it was the roughest ride she had ever had. The plane was just bouncing around, and right across the aisle was a little boy, 7, 8, 9 years old, and he was terrified, and he was crying, and he was just absolutely terrified. And so the woman wasn't concerned about her own safety, but she was really moved by this child. And so she went into what she knows as her state, and she goes, okay, now you stop that. And immediately the plane ride was perfectly calm and still for the entire rest of the plane ride. You could say coincidence. Okay, so now there's another story with that same woman. She's gone to Mexico, and she's hanging out with some high-ranking military people. And there is a ceremony that's going to be held in a sports stadium. And so she and some generals and generals' wives, they go, and they are, kidnappings happen in Mexico. And so these are prominent people, and they have bodyguards. And so the women are instructed, only stay, they're in some upper floor of the stadium, only stay within these bounds because there were guards. Well, the general's wife was, not wanting to follow that. And so she took our training lady, and they went off in some other part of the stadium where she was recognized, and she was kidnapped, and she was thrown into the back of, the two women were thrown into the back of a pickup, which is now speeding away from the stadium. And the general's wife, and in the back of the pickup is a guy with a gun on them. And the general's wife is hysterical. She's crying. And so Our Lady, moved by the plight of another, goes in state. And the guy in the back of the pickup with the gun is forcibly thrown out of the pickup, lands in the dust. Then the pickup engine stops running. The doors lock. And so the guys inside the pickup can't get out, and the soldiers come running, and they, arrest the bad guys and save the women. And so many and various are the tales from the Delta Kingdom. And it is possible to do things. Well, for example, there was a director of a foundation that I knew quite a lot about. He was a very powerful being, but somewhat unethical. And it was reported to me that he actually had waking Delta. And so this allowed me to understand how he was so effective in doing bad things at the upper levels of the foundation world where he operated. And so we do provide Delta trainings. They are by invitation only. We want to make sure that people have done enough ethical cleansing that they don't become Darth Vaders. We don't want to create any Darth Vaders. Now, sometimes, I'll share another story. There was a woman who came with her husband from Arizona to my then California center. They were both on their second marriage. And the woman she said she did not know what happiness was. Her entire, childhood and young adulthood and first marriage were horrific. Now she's on her second marriage, and at least it's peaceful, but she still doesn't know what happiness is. And so when I noted that she had Delta and asked her if she was aware of being able to influence other people, she almost started to cry. And I said, okay, well, what's going on? She had a story. She had become interested in psychic healing. and she'd taken online courses, and she had done readings, and she had, wanted to learn how to do psychic healing. Well, there was an instance where one of the ladies in her network was ill. So she did a meditation and sent that lady healing energy. That night, that lady was rushed to the hospital and nearly died. A week later, there was another lady that came to her attention that, was ailing. And so she sent this one healing energy. That lady was rushed to the hospital and nearly died. And when it happened the third time, she goes, maybe I shouldn't be sending energy to people. And I said, exactly right. You have so much hurt in you that when you connect with people, even though your conscious intention is to do good, what's flowing along that connection is all this anguish and terror and pain and suffering that you haven't cleared yet from your consciousness. And so when you make the Vulcan mind meld, you're sending all your tribulations to that hapless person. And so she had stopped doing this psychic healing, but she also did very deep forgiveness work. So you can have the best of intentions consciously, but if there is pain, suffering, anger, fear, sadness in your unconscious, if you have Delta, you will spread it around, and it's not a good thing to spread. So this is why we only do Delta trainings by invitation after people have done multiple Alpha and at least one Theta, and at least one of those trainings needs to be with me so I can evaluate. Recently, Brian, my operations director and one of our certified trainers here in Sedona, was leading a Theta training, and one of the trainees had a breakthrough into a full-on Kundalini with Delta. And it was extremely powerful. This was on day 5. I was called in. I was not part of the training. I was called in, looked through the polygraph records at the end of day 5, talked about Delta. The woman asked how you get an invitation to Delta. So I joined the training on day 6 and day 7 fully. Every part of the training, I was there. And because I wanted to see, the woman had had a lot of anger that she had dealt with in Alpha 1 and Alpha 2. And I wanted to see how thoroughly she'd been able to expunge it or to disappear it, dissolve it. And the happy news is that she did a great job, did very deep work. And at the end of day 7, I invited her to a Delta training. It was an auspicious moment because in that training, Brian had, who's done Theta before, he did a couple of Theta tune-ups while the trainees were doing their Theta. He got electrodes on and went in. And he had a big outbreak of Delta. Now, he already had qualified in terms of ethics, in terms of the work that he's done with me previously. And so that happy evening saw 2 people be invited into a Delta training, the trainee and Brian Elkhorn, one of our certified trainers. So very good things about Delta.
Wow, absolutely fantastic, Dr. Hardt. Thank you again for taking the time. I know how busy you are, and we all appreciate you being here with us.
It's a delight to talk about the leading edge.
Hi, I'm Tony Robbins. Listen, if you are looking to improve your brain, your psyche, your ability, your emotions, your ability to really maximize your performance, and you want to really dig into your brain, my dear friend Dr. Jim Hardt and his Biocybernaut program is extraordinary. I've been through it myself. My wife Sage has, members of my family have, and we found it to be truly extraordinary. But it is not for the faint at heart. Unless you're dead serious about really taking things to the next level, don't bother. We went through the Alpha program designed to maximize your ability to create alpha waves. And it was challenging and it was incredibly rewarding. And I'd recommend it to anybody serious about improving the quality of their lives or including the quality of their family lives as well. So check out Cybernaut, check out Dr. Jim Hardt. And if you do, I think you'll be really, really pleased. And the entire time you are learning to think and how you think these electrodes create sounds. And you learn how to put yourself in the zone of alpha. But it's a bitch. It's horrible. I wouldn't recommend it to anybody that wants easy experiences, but I'd recommend it to anybody that wants to grow immensely. And by the first day, I'm like, who do I got to shoot to get out of this thing? Oh, it's me. I'm the one that did this shit. Right? But by the end of the week, all three of us were able to go into this state of alpha. And if you're familiar with alpha, the best way I can describe alpha is there's no problem that can't be solved in alpha. Because every problem that we have was created by us.
Thank you for being here and absorbing this information about the science of brainwaves and about the stories of people whose lives have been beneficially altered, improved by doing brainwave training at Biocybernaut. And now I'm reaching out to you to invite you to come and be a part of the Biocybernaut adventure. Biocybernauts are to inner space what astronauts are to outer space. So come and adventure with us. And if you'd like to leave a comment on the videos, you can do that, or there's a link you can click if you'd like to learn more. We welcome you to Biocybernaut.